Buenas, buenas, buenas. I'm Vanessa, the host of Chick Lit, a podcast where I share my honest reviews of books that I think Latinas, women, and millennials would enjoy. Please subscribe and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, and YouTube at Chick Lit Podcast, and enjoy today's episode on the book The Brilliant Life of Eudora Honeysett by Annie Lyons. You would think by now I would have that paragraph memorized, but I don't. Okay, I'm going to try it again. I'm going to try it and not look. Okay, I'm going to look at myself up here. So, buenas, buenas, buenas. I'm Vanessa, the host of Chick Lit, a podcast where I... That's crazy. That's crazy that I forgot. Okay, ready? Buenas, buenas, buenas. I'm Vanessa, the host of Chick Lit, a podcast where I share my honest reviews of books that I think Latinas, women, and millennials would enjoy. Wow. Please subscribe and follow me at Chick Lit on Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all the places. And enjoy today's episode on the book The Brilliant Life of Eudora Honeysett by Annie Lyons. There are 384 pages in the book. The genres are contemporary historical fiction, chick lit, hello, and adult. The writing style is third-person limited, so that means that the narrator doesn't know everyone but has insight on one of the characters, Eudora. The chapters in today's book go back and forth between the different stages of Eudora's life until now, where she's 85 years old, trying to avoid getting to that frail, bedridden part of life that she finds very terrifying. Before I get deeper into the book, let's go a little bit into the author. I'll just read her about me on her website. She says, having realized early on that books are pretty much the best things in life, I've been lucky enough to spend my entire career working on them. My first job after leaving university was as a bookseller in a bookshop on Charing Cross Road, London, and then I worked for 11 years in publishing. Following redundancy in 2009, I was thrown into the world of stay-at-home motherhood, realizing that my brain was starting to fester like an old potato in the bottom of the vegetable tray. I enrolled in a creative, she says on, but I think it's in. I enrolled on a creative writing course and decided to try and write my first novel. It took me 2 years to finish it and another 2 years to get my first publishing deal. In July 2013, Not Quite Perfect was published, and I enjoyed a rather exciting summer as it reached #1 in the Kindle bestsellers. I have since written 6 other novels. I love to write about characters with whom readers can make a real connection and about subjects we can all relate to. Parenthood, love, families, grief, friendship, music, laughter. I want to carry readers along in a story which makes them laugh and shed the odd tear, but which ultimately leaves them feeling uplifted and hopeful. These are the stories I love to read, and so I write for myself and the thousands of readers just like me. It's quite honestly the best job in the world. I love that. And at the end of the book, where she was talking about, acknowledgments and a little bit about herself, she shared a lot about her relationship with her mother. So I want to read a little bit of, it's not long, but this is what she says in the back of the book. It says, my parents were of a different generation, having experienced childhood during the Second World War. I was always secretly proud of this because they bore a set of values that people admired. Stoicism, thriftiness, resilience. My mother kept the digging for victory mantra going long after the war, and she made, do, and mended many outfits for me. She was the queen of battling through life without complaint, of accepting the world as it was and not questioning the status quo. This attitude worked for me until I left for university. The world opened up like an oyster, and I was hungry for pearls. No subject was off limits, no question unasked. I had a curiosity about everything, which carried on into adult life through book selling, publishing, and then into my career as a writer. She goes on to talk about how her mother, in her last few years of life, the decision was taken from her on how she would die, and she was too poorly to leave the hospital. So she died in the early hours of Christmas Eve 2018, surrounded by the fairy lights and tinsel that she'd hung around her bed in her attempt to keep things normal. So it was a strange kind of therapy to be finishing Eudora's story after her mother died, but oddly comforting too. The author wanted to give a voice to the discussions she wished she'd had with her own mom, to start some necessary conversations about how we live and how we die. We all have a choice. She didn't manage to have this talk with her mom, but she will have it in time with her own children, because ultimately we should be able to laugh and cry as we accompany our loved ones on their final journeys, to celebrate their lives and say goodbye properly. She thinks she owes it to herself and those that you love to have those conversations. And I totally agree. I feel like all of this is very aligned with what Chicklit, the podcast, and my purpose is to live authentically and openly, have these hard discussions. And you're gonna hear a little bit more like throughout the episode, but it really makes it, I see a really clear connection between the author's mom and her experience growing up to Eudora, and also the young girl Rose in the book to the author herself. So I'm sure I'm sure it's very normal. I'm sure she agrees that there's a lot of parallels, but I think it's very obvious from the acknowledgments. Rose, the little girl, really resembles the author, and Eudora, the older woman, resembles the author's mother. So I just want to point that out. I thought that was beautiful, and I can't wait to be an author myself so that I can do something similar. Let's get into lo bueno. Eudora is an elderly woman who currently lives alone. She doesn't and never had a husband, doesn't and never had kids, and is terrified of becoming bedridden to be, as she puts it, manhandled, and her life being prolonged unnecessarily by doctors. She wants to go on her own terms. Her life right now has changed drastically from when she was a kid. Now Eudora has become invisible to people, and she has stopped noticing them too. She feels like nowadays society is all about consume or be consumed. It confirms her worst suspicions about humans and why she can't wait to be rid of them. Eudora views society as unkind and not understanding. It's impatient and full of judgment. It's interesting because from this description, she sounds like a nasty old lady, but she's not. She's definitely closed off and cold, but she's very polite in the sense that she says please and thank you, and she isn't out here ruining people's days. She's just alone and miserable, which is obviously still pretty sad. So you can see why she has decided to go down the voluntary assisted death route, where you pay this organization to unalive you. It's intended for people with terminal illnesses, and since you can't stop aging, Eudora decides that this is the way that she wants to go. She's still able to walk, feed herself, and be super independent, so she doesn't want to wait until she loses all of that to die in a hospital bed alone. And I get it. It's just, to be honest, it kind of reminds me of my own grandmother. This is a weird, I'm still getting used to sharing of myself and my life and experiences, so I feel like this transition is a little weird, but it really does remind me a lot of my grandmother. You know, my grandmother had liver cancer, and she had 1 round of radiation, and she told the doctors that, you know, she's too old and she didn't want to do it for the rest of her life. Like, what was the point of doing it when she was already really old? My grandmother was super upfront and super open, so I know like, that's what she said. I was there when she was talking to other adults. Like, she never really told me that, but when people would ask her how it was going, she's like, I'm old. Why would you waste your money for the next 10 years when it might not work and I'm already old anyway? So like my life is ending anyway, so why waste everyone's time? And she also didn't want to suffer through radiation if ultimately it wasn't going to work anyways. So she was like, you know what, I'm just going to do the radiation once, and if it works, cool, and if it doesn't, well, I'm 74 years old, so I've lived a good life, and we're good to go. She also, at this time, you know, I guess when she first got diagnosed, I was maybe 12 or 13. And I think she noticed that I was being more independent and like a teenager, and I didn't really want to go to her house every single weekend, or when she would come over, I kind of wanted to be in my room and stuff. She definitely lived her life for me. Like, every single day after work, she would come to my house. Every single weekend, I would be at her house, or she would be at my mom's house. Now that I was being more independent, she kind of viewed it as like, oh, okay, now I can go. Whereas if I was like 5, I was still too little and still really needed her. So if I feel like to her, it was like a perfect time to go. Because again, I was like 12, 13 when she first got diagnosed. And when we would talk about her cancer, she would literally say, I just want to make it to Vanessa's Sweet 15, because I had a quince. She's like, I just want to make it to that. She literally was like, I don't care when I die as long as I see Vanessa's Sweet 15, her quinceañera. And like, that is so sad to me. I wish that she would have wanted to live, but also I know that my grandmother was like running out of money and she wasn't able to work. And I don't think that she wanted to be a burden. And she knew that if she passed, the house would get sold and her money would disperse amongst her kids. And I think that was a pro for her as well. So yeah, she kind of just gave up on life and threw in the towel. Selfishly wish that she didn't do that because she would have been like a 90-ish right now. And I know that there are a lot of 90-year-olds that are out here still kicking it, and they're going to doctor's appointments, they're going to play cards, they're living their life. So selfishly, I do wish that she would have stayed around. I feel like my mom would have loved to have her stay at my house and taken care of her for the next 50 years if that's how it could have worked. But anyways, here we are. Let's keep going with the book. So when Eudora was a small kid, her mom was pregnant with her sister Stella, and that's when her dad got drafted in the war. Before he left, he made Eudora promise to take care of her mother and unborn sister. She took this promise very seriously. Her dad was away for several years, and he eventually died when Stella was like 3 or 4 years old. Eudora was parentified the entire time that he was away, and once he died, it was very clear that her mother had clocked out and all of their futures depended on her. Her mom was unable to cook, clean, or parent Stella. So Eudora did it all. She raised Stella, took care of her mother, and was a buffer between the two of them. Those scenes where she's trying to keep the peace between her broken mother and her rebelling sister were the saddest scenes for me to read. There are two people and she's managing them as a child herself. I don't think anyone should have to do that, let alone like a teenager or a young woman who has her entire life ahead of her. Like, that was really heartbreaking to me. She stopped living her life in order to take care of both of them. Her sister always had a mean spirit vibe to her, but Eudora chalked it up to her being a little kid and not knowing any better, or her being a teenager and figuring out life. Eventually, Eudora worked up the courage to date someone, and they were engaged to be married. Stella tried to sabotage their relationship several times. For example, she went on a double date with Eudora, the guy that she was dating, her fiance, and then Eudora's friend and her date as well. And so when Stella went, she was a fifth wheel, and she, was flirting with Eudora's best friend's boyfriend. And also at the party, she was drinking and talking to an older crowd, and Eudora's fiance had to go in and save her a little bit, like stop her from getting into trouble. At that point, you're just like, you're an annoying little sister, like a bad sister. But at their engagement party, Stella got really drunk and started stabbing the engagement cake. Like, I thought that was so weird, like so excessive. And that's where you just start to hate her at that point, because it's like, really, like, stabbing a cake at your sister's engagement party, like, that seems pretty obvious to not do. Like, I think at the date thing, it's like, okay, you're a teenager, you don't know, you're a brat, you can excuse that a little bit. But when it comes to the engagement thing, I thought that was psychotic. But then after that engagement party, she kind of settled down more, and she kind of accepted the fact, like, okay, like, my sister's getting married and she's, leaving and individualizing, like we've talked about before. Stella starts working at a youth center, and Eudora's fiance was working at the youth center too. And that gave Eudora a sense of safety, that someone was there looking after Stella since she was like bad as fuck. And you guessed it, her fiance was cheating on Eudora with her little sister. Stella and the fiance ran off together, never to be seen again. Eudora was heartbroken. She wanted nothing to do with either of them. Like, when the little sister would call, she would hang up on her. She wanted nothing to do with her. After some time, she was able to heal and move on and live her life with just her and her mom. So eventually, a coworker of Eudora's asks her out on a date, and she was feeling up for it. She felt, ready to start dating again. So she went out with the guy, but he started drinking and started being like a little too forward for her, because again, remember, she's prim and proper, so he's being very forward with her, and she ends up rejecting him at the party. And when they go back to work, he tells HR to note in her file that she's difficult to work with, and this obviously would harm her career, so she has to switch jobs. This happened in the 50s, 60s-ish. These types of things still happen today. It negatively affects them in the workplace. I honestly don't want to even get more into that, because I feel like the people who listen to my podcast already are aware of like sexism in the workplace, so I just don't want to be redundant. I don't know who that would be servicing, unless there's like some dudes who are living with their head under a rock listening to this, but I doubt it. So I'm just gonna keep it moving. Eudora later on gets together with someone who she grew up with, who was now divorced and had kids. They were very much in love, even though his parents didn't really want anything to do with her because, you know, he was divorced and they're against divorces. So it really had nothing to do with Eudora. It's not like they didn't like her. It's just they didn't want their son to be divorced, so they wanted nothing to do with Eudora. And Eudora's mom, being as like detached and disassociated as she was, it's not that she didn't like the guy, she just didn't like that her daughter was dating someone who was divorced either, like that same thing. So they're in love, they're together, there's a little bit of tension because of, you know, the divorce or whatever, but they love each other and it's going well, right? Well, turns out that his ex-wife is deciding to move to another country with their kids, and so he decides that he's gonna go follow them, not get back together with her, but just move to the country with them. And he asks Eudora to go live with him and relocate. So Eudora, you know, has to go home and talk to her mom because it's not just her. And when she goes home, her mom had tried to unalive herself. She left a note and Eudora found her. So she doesn't leave. She loses out on love again, and another heartbreak in Eudora's life story. What seems like a few years later, I'm not really sure of the timeline, Stella calls and says that she's pregnant and implied that Eudora's ex-fiance was hitting her, and Eudora wasn't super responsive and didn't immediately tell her to come home. So when the fiance ended up pushing Stella down the stairs, she died, and so did the baby. So Eudora carries that guilt with her for the rest of her life. She feels like she should have done more. She should have forgiven her sister and let her come home. Even though it's obviously not Eudora's fault, she felt like it was her fault because it was her responsibility to take care of her sister and her mom, and now her sister was dead. And so she, you know, internalizes that, and that's so sad. I feel so bad for her. But honestly, I didn't really cry throughout any of that, which I don't know what that says about me, but I didn't cry through any of that. But when we come to present day, a new family moves into a house across the street or next door. It's a pregnant couple and their 10-year-old daughter, Rose. Rose is very curious. She asks for what she wants. She's very outspoken and spunky. She dresses however she wants and lives life outside of the box. As I would argue all kids do, until society stuffs them into a box and labels them and makes them hide their uniqueness. But Rose's family doesn't do that to her, so she's able to be herself. And we love Rose for that. She's very special and unique, very sweet little girl. She manages to squeeze her way into Eudora's life by inviting herself over, being friendly with the cat, and keeping tabs on when Eudora leaves the house. Like, oh, I saw you leave, like, or you didn't leave, I just want to make sure you're okay. Like, she's super nosy, but in a very sweet way. You like Rose. You don't find her annoying. I mean, at least I didn't. We eventually find out that the reason why Rose and her family moved was because she had been bullied at her old school because she was so different and special. So being friends with Eudora and this other older gentleman, Stanley, gives Rose a new community to be part of. And like, what 10-year-old is just friends with two elderly people? There's a lot of similarity between the three of them. Rose is young, so there's not much for her to control because her parents are in charge of everything. Stanley's wife has passed away, so he can't control that situation. And now Eudora is old and, gonna pass away soon, so she can't control that either. And they're all kind of being there for each other, supporting each other, being a source of light and happiness for each other, and healing each other by being really close friends. So it's very sweet. I love to see their little community come together. And it's because of Rose and Stanley. And it's because of Rose. Yeah. I actually thought that Eudora and Stanley would date because his wife passed, but I think that Stanley was a couple years younger than Eudora, so they're just very close friends. And as Eudora gets close to Rose and Stanley, she starts to soften. The first time we see it is at a doctor's office when the doctor is treating the new young female doctor poorly, talking down to her, being unkind to Eudora, and Eudora puts him in his place. Previously, she didn't have the energy to interact with people. She kind of let them go on about their days without interrupting their rude behavior. But now she has the energy because her friends are giving her energy in life. The narrator says, the young doctor and old woman stare at each other as a flicker of recognition passes between them. It's the look of two women who are united in support of each other, regardless of age. For Eudora, it's as if she found her voice again and discovered to her surprise that she has something to say. She gets closer and closer to Rose and Stanley, and she starts to feel a responsibility to Stanley's late wife and family. She feels like she has to be there for him and make sure he's okay, since he's so lost and sad without his wife. When she starts meeting his kids and families at events, she realizes that he speaks very fondly of her and really cherishes their friendship. At this point in the book, somewhere in the middle, I think how close they are and how much they care about each other may even solidify Eudora in her decision to unalive herself on her terms, because she doesn't want to be a burden. She's afraid everyone leaves anyway, so she might as well just go while she's able to avoid the pain of them leaving her when she might need them most. Once Stanley starts dating someone, she feels like he's in good hands and he'll be okay. Rose also started school around this time, so Eudora thought no one needed her anymore. So when Stanley is dropping her off at the airport for her to go to the place to unalive herself, he's like, why are you so cold? Why are you so distant? And he convinces her that they love her and want to be there for her and that she's not a burden. I think it's the first time in Eudora's life that she feels this way, and that's when Eudora se desahoga and tells Stanley everything that happened in her life, like with her sister, her fiance, her dad, the one guy that she, really loved who moved away. She tells him everything and tells him that she was just about to go unalive herself. But he, tells her, like, I care about you and we love you just the way that you are. They don't judge her for her not wanting to hug them. They don't judge her for wanting to be alone sometimes. Like, her entire community now really accepts her, and he convinces her that she's not a burden. It wasn't until, she's 85, deciding that she wants to die, that she finally feels love and people who care for her as much as she cares for them. It's quite warm and heartbreaking all at the same time. The last 10% of the book is about Eudora's health declining and how her community shows up for her. She even gets a death doula to make sure she's spending her last days the way that she wants, and that's with all her loved ones around her every day. It's so sweet. And you know what's so funny? If you watch my dailies on YouTube, you heard the story already, but I actually, when I was about to finish this book, I went downstairs to go get my packages, and when I was talking to one concierge woman, there was an elderly woman that was there talking to the other concierge woman, and she was like, oh, I have some papers that I want to shred. And that concierge woman did not respond to her verbally, but got up and went around and hugged the elderly woman, and she started sobbing. And you could just tell, like, her husband obviously passed away. So I'm just standing there, like, awkwardly, like, okay, let me get my packages so I can, like, this woman doesn't need an audience for her pain. So I just, like, kind of got my stuff and ran away, and she ran with me. So she's like, not running, but she quickly comes to the elevator with me, crying. She can't stop herself, obviously. And I, press the buttons for us to go up, and she's crying and crying. She's like, I'm sorry, I just lost my husband. And, I was just like, oh, like, people care about you. They want to be there for you. Don't isolate, call people. They want to cry with you. I was literally reading my book, and then I go downstairs and this woman is crying because her husband died. And I'm kind of telling the woman stuff of that Eudora is talking about, or Eudora is realizing that people really do love you and you're not a burden and they want to be there for you. And so I was just telling that woman everything. So it was very freaky that all that happened at the same time. And I want to be friends with the elderly woman in my building because I feel really bad. Like, I don't want her to feel alone. I'm here all the time. I can hang out with her. I can go for a walk with her. I'll cry with her. Like, girl, if you want to cry, I will sit on your couch with you and I will cry with you. I'll cry harder than you. So much so that you'll probably end up laughing at, like, bitch, are you okay? Like, literally, I'm the one to cry with you. So let me know. But yeah, poor lady, I feel so bad. Another thing that I noticed when I was reading this book is I did a lot better at reading the chapter titles with this book. I was really intentional, and when I realized, mid-page that I had skipped the title at the top, I would go back and reread it. I've also been super conscious of my depth disorder that I have. I don't know if a lot of you know, but my eyes struggle to determine how far away things are from me. But my brain has done a really good job of making up for it. So for example, when I'm reading, I'll like read with my lips. And it's just because another body part moving and having attention to the reading helps my eyes and my brain register what I'm reading. And another thing that my eyes do to keep track is instead of reading the words like this, like across the screen, left to right, I read on a Kindle, so screen, but across the page, my eyes will jump down and then come back to the line and jump down like to the next line to kind of get a preview of what's to come, so that when I'm reading, my brain already has a heads up, like, okay, this is what's coming. But with this book, it was so hard to keep track of. I don't know why. Like, I would say a sentence and it was like, I don't know how to, it's like, okay, so I'll explain it like this. Like, if I'm reading line A, like I'm reading line A, reading line A, reading line A, right? That's how you're supposed to read it. And then you read line B, line B, line B, line B, line B, right? My brain goes, read line A, jump to line B, go back to line A, go to line B, go back to line A, right? So my brain was going A, B, A, B, A, B. And it's like, it's never been that bad before. I have gotten confused in the past, and it does confuse me sometimes. But this felt like nonstop. It was really difficult to read the book because of my like depth disorder. So I don't know if it's like a Kindle thing. I don't know if it was just this book. I really don't know. I don't know what was happening, but I just really noticed that it was hard for my eyes to really register what I was reading. And I do wish that I would have done this book in audiobook, because it was that difficult. And so it's frustrating. Like, I always joke that, like, you know, because I'm so blind, my contacts, they're -5. If I were alive 100 years ago, like, I would have never been able to go to school. I would have been kept home because my vision would be so bad that it would have been a disability, and I would not have been able to go to school. Like, I would have been at home, like, I guess the same thing that all girls were doing 100 years ago, not going to school. But the point is, like, my life would be significantly worse if I wasn't alive today because of how blind I am. And so similarly with this depth perception thing, it's a disorder. Like, I have a disability, and it disrupts my life with something as simple as reading. So just something that I noticed, and something that I hate, but what are you gonna do? For the chisme portion, this whole book obviously brings up the topic of assisted death being an option for people with terminal diseases. There are 10 or 11 states right now that assisted death is legal. We have Washington, D.C., which isn't a state, but it's legal in Washington, D.C. California, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, New Mexico, Maine, Montana, New Jersey, Hawaii, and Washington. You have to have a terminal illness in order to opt for that. And there's a whole process that goes into it. You have to have like doctors all agree that it's a terminal illness and there's absolutely no way that you'll be cured. You have to go to like a therapist. Like, so many things go in. It's not like you can just like go on Monday and then die Tuesday. Like, that's not how it works. There's a whole big process, and Eudora goes through some of it in the book, but it's not very detailed. You know, this is a fiction book for entertainment, so they're not going into detail of what happens, but it is a very like strenuous process, and it does take a while. But I don't know, I wish that our society did a better job of taking care of people who had disabilities. You know, like when I think about my grandmother, like if she had a place to live, or if she had money to have food on the table, would she have continued to live? Maybe. Like, she was living really poor, and she talked to me a lot about how she didn't have money. Thinking of Eudora, thinking of people who have terminal illnesses and they just want to die and get it over with, it's like, if our society, if our circumstances were better, like, would people like continue to live? And it's like, if you want to live, I think you should be able to live. I don't know. And if you want to die, like, should you be able to die? I don't know the answers. I don't know, but it's just very sad and a hard topic and very complex. But Eudora also gets a death doula in the book, and they describe them as people who ensure people leave this world feeling comforted and unafraid, because death is inevitable, but it shouldn't be feared. It's to provide the opportunity to speak openly and frankly about dying. It reminds me a lot of a doula in terms of pregnancy. There are certain things during, giving birth or even during pregnancy that aren't super necessary. It's just scientifically proven to not be necessary. A doula will be with you in your appointments or be with you during labor and advocate for you to not have those things. Or, for example, a lot of doctors, when you're giving birth, won't really talk to you because obviously you're busy birthing, but they'll put their fingers inside of you, or they'll do things to your stomach or move your body until you have to lay on your back. And it's a doula during birth will make sure that doctors are getting consent before they're touching you or inserting things inside of you or, just doing anything to you or your baby. And so similarly for a death doula, it's the same thing. They're making sure that the people who are about to pass away, that they're being cared for in the way that they want. And in Eudora's case, the death doula made sure that all of her favorite things that were on her first floor, that they were all brought up to the second floor that she was living in to make sure that she was having a positive experience as she, finished life. And I thought that was beautiful. I want a death doula. I want all the doulas. Any type of doula that exists in the world, birth, death, all of them, I'll take it. Just in case anyone wants to know for, if I'm on my deathbed and I'm not able to speak, just get a doula. Let them have the nurturing, warm side that doctors often miss out on. So take note, write that in your notes, text it to somebody, thank you in advance. For lo malo, I guess I kind of did touch on it, but it's I want to know how Eudora pays for all of this. She has a home, she has a death doula, she paid for the services to unalive herself, she paid to go on this trip to go, even though maybe that was part of the expenses of the unaliving herself, the unassisted death. But the point is how do you have all this money? And she's going out shopping, she's going to events, she's living her life. How? It's my impression is she was a secretary in the 50s and 60s. Her dad was in World War II. I can't imagine her getting thousands of dollars a month still in the early 2000s. I don't know how this stuff works. I don't know how government assistance works for elderly people in the UK, much less in the US. I have no idea what no clue what's going on. That's my question. That's my lo malo, is how does this girl do this? The book that the author has written that I would want to read is called With the End in Mind, Dying, Death, and Wisdom in an Age of Denial. Love it. I totally agree. I'm very interested in that. The next episode will be on The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. You can also follow me on social media and YouTube at Chicklit Podcast. I also am uploading daily videos on YouTube. That is super raw, where I'm talking about every single day, what I'm doing, what I'm editing, my feelings in real time. Whereas the podcast, I'm obviously talking about books. And on social media, I'm just doing it in an influencer, not really deep diving into things surface level. So these daily YouTube videos are going to be more in real time, super raw, in the morning, didn't even shower, haven't done anything. First thing I'm doing is recording. So if that interests you, please go listen and give me feedback, because I want to know what works and what doesn't work. And if you have any book recommendations, send them my way. And if you want to be on an episode, let me know. Thank you for listening. Bye.